What's happening? This is Isai Rodriguez, host of the Datsplanation podcast, where I cater to the professional working man, 40 and above, who's looking to make positive changes to his health, lose weight, and become stronger overall through simple lifestyle changes. I'm here to share inspiration, tips, and proven lessons that I've personally learned and lived through in my 40 plus years on this beautiful blue planet. So today, we'll be talking about the 6 scientifically proven ways to reset your mind after an unprecedented COVID-19 year. That's a mouthful. And then we'll be moving on to our second segment with, is red meat really bad for you or not? So you won't want to miss that. And before we get into that, if you'd like to continue the conversation, then get on over to podcast.datsplanation.com/VIP to get on the VIP Insiders community, where I share more entertaining behind-the-scenes stories, tips, and hacks that'll keep you feeling younger each and every day. That's podcast.datsplanation.com/VIP. Again, that's podcast.datsplanation.com/VIP. Be in the know, starting right now. Also, don't forget to rate me on Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, or wherever you're listening to this podcast episode, and leave me a nice, fat, juicy 5-star review and some absolutely beautiful words of why you love the show so much. It really helps me get the word out, and it's honestly the one place where your vote truly matters. And now, let's move on into our first segment, Healthy Conversations. Oh boy, oh man. So in last week's episode, I think I struck a nerve with my VIP community, in a good way, of course. So if you remember, we were talking about how to use the 8 points of wellness, or rather the 8 dimensions. And if you remember back to that episode, they were, the first was physical, second social, the third was emotional, fourth was spiritual, the fifth intellectual, sixth was the financial, seventh occupational, and the eighth was environmental. And we talked about how we could use these dimensions, these realms, if you will, to set healthy boundaries for ourselves in order to start setting up our new year right, mentally speaking, of course. We want to mentally enter the new year with a positive outlook and starting with proper boundaries, and following these 8 principles, or these 8 points, will essentially help you do exactly that. And so I said earlier that I struck a nerve because, dang, the feedback that I got from all of you was, it was awesome. It was freaking amazing, to be, for sure. So I know you're listening, and I wanted to personally thank you. I really appreciate it, and like I said, I am listening. In fact, I shout you out by name on the show, but I haven't gotten your permission just yet. So we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at a very heartfelt thank you and a warm brotherly hug to all you guys that reached out to me. So anyway, since it appears that everyone agrees with me as far as, people's mental state not being quote unquote all there, I basically decided to dig a little deeper into this. And now this is something that I normally do with my VIP community. I usually go in a little deeper, a little more into detail with the community. But since it seems to be like, a hot one, like I figured, why not, start the new year? Why not start the new year off with a little freebie? If you know what I mean. Because there's no doubt in anybody's mind that 2020 was hard for everyone and tragic for so many others. And now that COVID vaccines are finally here and slowly being pushed out to all the frontline workers, or heroes, if you ask me, it's giving much needed hope for a return to normalcy and a truly, truly happy 2021. But the thing is that we've all dealt with months of anxiety, grief and loneliness, and this can easily create like a spiral of negativity that's hard to break out of. Your brain has, it's been trained to hear and accept negativity. You hear it in the news, you see it all over social media and on the internet in general. After a while, that becomes part of you. You start becoming one with your environment. And if your environment is negative, then you are, by default, are going to become negative. You know what I mean? And that's mostly because chronic stress changes the brain. So all the repetitive negativity changes or rewires your brain and your way of thinking into a negative one. And sometimes when we're low, you end up having no interest in doing the things that could actually make you feel better. And the reality is that to enjoy your life in 2021, you'll need to snap out of your destructive habits and get your energy levels back. Mentally center yourself and your energy, or recalibrate your energy, if you will. In some cases, that'll initially mean forcing yourself to do the things that will gradually make you feel better. But if you're experiencing more severe symptoms, there's no denying that you may want to speak to a professional about therapy or even medication. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but nonetheless, I wanted to throw it out there as a disclaimer. So having been disclaimed, here are the 6 evidence-based ways to change your brain for the better. The first is being kind and helpful. So kindness and empathy can affect the brain dramatically. In fact, there was a study that showed that making a charitable donation activated the brain's reward system in the same way to actually receiving money. So like the same chemical reaction that your brain has when you receive money or your paycheck or whatever, by you donating to charity, your brain starts firing off those same types of signals. And it also applies to helping others who've been wronged, like that are down and out, So volunteering can also give a sense of meaning in life. It promotes happiness, health, and well-being. Also, older adults who volunteer regularly will no doubt exhibit greater life satisfaction and reduce depression and anxiety. Why do you think, people that, or I should say philanthropists, people that have generated so much money throughout their career and throughout their life, when they get to a certain point where they don't need that money anymore, and they start donating their time and they start, giving to the less fortunate. And why do you think those people are so happy? So again, in a nutshell, making others happy is a great way to make yourself happy. That's the first point. The second thing I want to get into that we can use to uplift your spirits, to get past this horrendous 2020 and move into the new year at full force, is exercise. I love exercise. I mean, don't get me wrong. I could be lazy at times, or many times if you're speaking to my wife. But the reality is that exercise has been linked to both better physical and mental health, including improved cardiovascular health and reduced depression. They say that children who get the right amount of daily exercise, they say that they perform better in school overall. And it also promotes better cognitive functions and better performance in young adults. So it helps you process things easier or better, or for lack of better terms, to make better decisions in life by incorporating exercise into your daily routine. In older adults, exercise also maintains cognitive performance and builds their resistance to mental disorders like dementia. It's been proven. There's been studies that go back that show how individuals with higher levels of fitness, or more, that they're more physically active, that they have an increased brain volume, like their brain is essentially bigger, for lack of better terms. And this is associated with the whole better cognitive performance in older adults. So basically, again, people who exercise, they've been known to have larger brains, or at least more gray matter in the brain, which is the part of the brain that contains most of the brain's neuronal cell bodies. And if you don't know what what this is, these cell bodies, they're located in the part of the brain involved with muscle control and sensory perception, such as seeing and hearing, memory, emotions, speech, self-control, decision making, things like that. Also, I think we all know this one, but it's worth mentioning that people who exercise live longer, period. Again, one of the very best things that you can do to reboot your brain is to go out and get some fresh air during a nice brisk walk, a run, or maybe riding a bike outdoors or something. Just getting out, being active, running around, getting some exercise, breathing some fresh air, And now the key with this fresh air thing is to make sure you pick something you actually like doing, so that you keep doing it. I personally like variety, so that's why I'm always trying new exercises, and I'll bring those exercises that I like personally to all of you, because if you're like me, then I know you'll appreciate it as well. So that's the second thing is exercise. The third thing to set us up for a fabulous 2021 is pretty simple also. Eat well. It's pretty well known that nutrition can substantially influence the development and health of your brain, the physical structure and the functioning of your brain, which in turn supports like a more positively focused outlook on life overall. So if you're feeding your brain the proper nutrition, that'll bleed over into your mental state. It provides the proper building blocks for the brain to create and maintain connections, which is critical for improved cognition and academic performance. There's evidence that shows that a long-term lack of nutrients can lead to structural and functional damage to the brain. And not only that, but a good quality diet is related to larger brain volume. So in one study, I have a couple of numbers. I brought a bunch of numbers with me today on this podcast. If we were on video, I'd be holding it up, showing you. But anyway, in one study of 2,000 participants from a UK biobank showed that a higher intake of cereal had the long-term beneficial effects of increasing the volume of gray matter. Again, a key component of the central nervous system, which is linked to improved cognition. So the study also went on to say how diets that are rich in sugar, saturated fats, or calories, basically does the opposite. So they can damage your neural function, which at the end of the day diminishes your cognition or your cognitive processes. So basically, you won't feel or be as sharp as someone who eats a cleaner diet and goes out for a long walk or a run or something like that. A not so great diet essentially reduces the brain's ability to make new neural connections, which again negatively affects your cognition. So no matter what age, you have to remember to eat a well-balanced diet, including your fruits, your vegetables, and cereal. And if you're like me and want to squeeze that extra performance out of your brain and your body, then you may want to get your hands on some premium supplements to help you do that. That's what they're for. And speaking of four, the fourth thing for a successful mindset or setting yourself up in 2021 is keeping socially connected. So this is a tough one, especially these COVID pandemic days. Believe it or not, this is a big one. Whether you're extroverted or introverted, it doesn't matter. Loneliness and social isolation is super common across all ages, genders, and cultures. And this is just generally speaking. You can imagine how much more this is because of the pandemic right now. There's tons of scientific evidence that shows that social isolation is harmful to your physical and mental health. In fact, one study in particular showed how This one was actually a recent study. It showed how COVID, like the isolation that we're going through currently, has a negative effect on how well your brain handles your emotions. This same study also said that the effect was smaller in those people that stayed connected with others during the lockdown. So this leads you to believe that developing social connections essentially decreases or lessens your feelings of loneliness. And because of this, loneliness and social isolation is increasingly being recognized as a critical public health issue. Because in all honesty, it is. It's kind of like the stories you hear of people who are thrown in solitary confinement for whatever it is that they did. Like, what happens to them? You hear the stories, you see the evidence, they end up going batshit crazy, right? And let me tell you, it's a thing. And social interaction is linked with feeling positive and also tickles your brain's reward system. And as smartphones and social media have proven, we all love that subtle brain, those subtle little brain rewards. So in 2021, be sure to keep up with family and friends. Don't forget to expand your horizons and make some new connections. And while we're on the topic of new connections, the fifth thing that we can do is to learn something new. So the brain changes during critical periods of development. We know this, but did you know that this is also a lifelong process? It's true. There are plenty of academic reviews that suggest that mentally stimulating leisure activities increase brain reserves, which basically means that they can act as a protective shield against cognitive decline, especially in older adults. So things like the learning of a new skill can ultimately modify both your brain function and the underlying brain structure. So for example, an activity like juggling, it's been shown to increase white matter, or the tissue composed of nerve fibers in the brain that is closely tied to visual motor skills. And in that same way, musicians have been shown to have increased gray matter in the parts of the brain that process auditory information. And even something like learning a new language can change the structure of your brain. So there's no time like the present to learn something new, because God knows we have plenty of time on our hands these days, And while we're talking about having time on our hands, the sixth thing that we're going to be that you can do to effectively lift your spirits and set you up for a winning 2021 after this miserable 2020. Yes, I'm going there. I'm calling out the elephant, man, because damn, it was harsh. But anyway, the sixth thing is to sleep properly. Now this sounds pretty simple, but in actuality, I understand people have sleeping disorders, I guess, or issues getting to sleep, but sleep is an essential component of human life, period. Yet so many people just don't understand the relationship between good brain health and the process of sleeping. So during sleep, the brain essentially reorganizes and recharges itself and removes toxic waste byproducts, which helps to maintain normal brain function. So sleep is also very important for transforming experiences from our day-to-day life into our long-term memory and maintaining cognitive and emotional function and reducing mental fatigue. So building on that last point of learning something new, make sure you're getting plenty of sleep so you're able to commit what you're learning into long-term memory. Actually, some studies of sleep deprivation have shown deficits in memory and attention, as well as changes in the reward system, which often disrupts your emotional functioning. It also helps assist your immune system, so you'll notice that if you have the optimal balance of quantity and quality of sleep, you'll find that you have more energy, better well-being, you'll be able to develop your creativity and your thinking. So let's make the most of ourselves in 2021 and help others do the same with these 6 mind rebooting tips. And with that said, let's move on to our second segment, Mighty Man. So in this segment of Mighty Man, we're talking about or we're answering the question, is red meat really bad for you or not? Now, this is a funny topic because just a few days ago, actually, I was talking with my wife and we were trying to figure out what we were going to eat for dinner, basically. And I mentioned a few options, and then I said something to the effect of, I just don't want to order steak because I've been eating nothing but steak and red meat the past few days. So this topic is probably more for me than any of you, but oddly enough, I started putting my notes a week prior to this weekend, and maybe all the preparation of the notes sat in the back of my head and my brain kept looking for red meat every time we ate. I'm not sure, but but here's the thing. People have been eating meat throughout evolution, and they have digestive systems that are well equipped to handle it. So traditional populations like the Maasai have eaten much more red meat than the average Westerner, but they remain in excellent health. Have you ever wondered why that is? Because I always did. But we have to remember that the meat that we eat and consume today is so much different than the meat that people ate in the past. So back in the day, animals roamed free and ate grass and insects and other foods that were just there. That it was natural to them. It was plentiful, it was available, and that's what they ate. You know, so if you can picture a wild cow on the field 10,000 years ago, roaming free and chewing on grass and other edible plants, you'll notice that the meat from this cow from 10,000 years ago is way different than the meat from a cow that was born and raised in a factory, fed a grain-based diet, and then given growth hormones and antibiotics. Smash that like button and leave me a comment if you agree. I mean, these days, some meat products are so highly processed after the animal is slaughtered. I mean, think about it. They're smoked, they're cured, then treated with nitrates, preservatives, and several other, who knows how many other chemicals. And now, taking all of this into consideration, red meat is still one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. That's basically because it's loaded with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and various other nutrients that can have profound effects on your health. And I have some, again, like I mentioned earlier, I have some numbers here for you. I'm just going to kind of read them off. So a 3.5 ounce portion of raw ground beef, the 10% fat category, 3.5 ounces contains 25% of the RDA of vitamin B3, the recommended daily allowances for vitamin B3 or niacin as we know it. It has 37% of the RDA of vitamin B12, which by the way is unattainable from plant foods, 18% of the RDA of vitamin B6, aka pyridoxine, and let's not forget the iron now. It has 12% of the RDA of iron. This is a totally different form from plant-derived iron. So the iron in red meat is a high-quality heme iron, which is absorbed a lot better, much better than the iron contained in plants. Red meat also has 32% of the RDA of your zinc intake. So these numbers are ridiculous. And all of this comes with only 176 calories and 20 grams of quality animal protein and 10 grams of fat. I mean, you can't beat it, if you ask me. It's also rich in important nutrients like creatine and carnosine. These are essentially nutrients that non-meat eaters are often deficient in. You know, it can potentially affect muscle and brain function, and non-meat eaters are deficient in this because plants, they essentially can't really get much of these nutrients from plants. Red meat is very nutritious, especially if it comes from animals that are naturally fed and raised, because as you know, grass-fed beef is even more nutritious than grain-fed beef. It contains plenty of heart-healthy omega-3s, the fatty acid CLA, and higher amounts of vitamins A and E. It's a great source of protein, obviously, iron, B12, zinc, creatine, and other nutrients. And now the effect of red meat on health, well, they've been well studied in the past for sure, but Most of these studies are so-called observational studies, which are designed to detect associations but can't prove causation or the causes of certain health problems. So for instance, several observational studies show that red meat is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and even death, like just straight up death. But that doesn't mean that all red meats have the same health effects. So for example, a massive review of 20 studies that included over 1.2 million individuals found that processed meat was associated with an increased risk of heart disease and diabetes, but there were no associations found for unprocessed red meat. In a separate yet very large observational study, including over 400,000 people, processed meat increased the risk of death, while again, no effect was seen for unprocessed red meat. And when it comes to heart disease, diabetes, and death, you have to distinguish between processed and unprocessed meat. It's super important because the two generally, if not always, have totally different effects. And so the observational studies seem to agree that processed meat, not unprocessed red meat, the processed meat, is associated with an increased risk of early death and many other diseases. But even so, it's important to keep in mind that these studies have limitations. It's impossible to draw strong conclusions from observational studies, and the only way to establish cause and effect is basically to perform randomized controlled trials, or what's known as randomized controlled trials. And the same goes for things like cancer. Several observational studies show that red meat eaters are at a greater risk of cancer, but larger reviews looking at the evidence as a whole show that the effect is weak and inconsistent at best. And now, when you look closely, practically all these studies that allegedly prove that, red meat causes harm, or observational studies or whatever, these types of studies can only demonstrate a correlation, or, that two variables are associated. They can tell us that individuals who eat a lot of red meat are more likely to get sick, but they can't prove that red meat is the cause of them being sick or getting sick. One of the main problems with studies like this is that there's too many variables involved. So for example, people who eat red meat are less health conscious and more likely to smoke, drink excessively, eat more sugar, exercise less, they're a lot less health conscious. Those things they don't really matter to them. For the most part, don't get me wrong. People who are health conscious, like you and I, behave very differently than people who are not. And it's impossible to account for all of these different factors in these observational studies. Another problem with observational studies is that they're usually based on food frequency questionnaires. So it's literally just a questionnaire in which people are expected to remember what they ate in the past. It's always a bad idea, in my opinion, to make health assumptions or decisions based on observational studies alone. In fact, there are many cases in history, like in the past, where randomized controlled trials ended up showing the exact opposite effect of what an observational study showed. So for example, the Nurses' Health Study once showed that estrogen replacement therapy helped reduce heart disease in women. Later, a randomized controlled trial discovered that it actually increased the risk. So observation, the point here, I know this doesn't apply to you and I, this estrogen thing, but I found that it's proof where, observational studies simply cannot be used to determine cause and effect. Now randomized controlled trials, that's a different story. They're basically the gold standard of science, So in these studies, people are randomly placed into separate groups. So for example, one group eats diet A, while the other group eats diet B. Then the researchers follow the people and see which diet is more likely to lead to a particular outcome. And so several randomized control trials have examined the health effects of red meat directly, and a few studies investigated the effects of red meat on risk factors for heart disease. And one of the reviews of the control studies concluded that eating half a serving or more of red meat daily doesn't negatively affect the risk of heart disease factors like your blood lipids and blood pressure. Another review showed more or less the same outcome, and that's that lean, unprocessed beef does not negatively affect people's blood pressure or their blood lipids either, compared to chicken or fish. Either one, or I should say neither one, was better or worse than the other. They were all kind of along the same lines. And now let's keep in mind here that all of these studies examined lean red meat. To date, there are no studies that have examined the health effects of high-fat red meat, but there are plenty of studies that compare high-fat diets with low-fat diets. So that's something to think about, something to keep in mind. And these studies have the primary goal of reducing saturated fat, which means that the people in them have to eat less red and processed meats, which happen to be high in saturated fat. Here's another one for you. I have one randomized controlled trial called the A to Z weight loss study. Compared the Atkins diet, which is high in red meat, to the Ornish diet, which is quite the opposite from Atkins, basically a low-fat vegetarian diet with no red meat. After 1 year, the Atkins group had lost more weight and had greater improvements in some of the most important risk factors for disease. There have been many other studies that compared low carb or, high in red meat diets versus low fat or low in red meat diets. In these studies, the low carb diets led to much better health outcomes. Taken together, all together, lumping them up, these studies suggest again that unprocessed red meat doesn't negatively impact your health. It may even have benefits. Now, it's also important to understand that when meat is cooked at a high temperature, it can form harmful substances that have been found to cause cancer in animals. But again, a link in humans has not been found. And this doesn't only apply to meat. There are other foods that can also form these similar harmful compounds when cooked at high temperatures. And so here are some tips that I found to ensure that your meat doesn't form these substances. And I have 5 of them for you. I'm just going to rattle them off real quick. The first is, use a softer cooking method like stewing or steaming instead of grilling or frying. Also, minimize that cooking at high heats and try to not expose your meat to a flame, a direct flame. So if you're grilling, try to grill it maybe a little lower flame, or at a minimum, don't let the meat or the flame hit the meat, Also, don't eat charred or smoked food. If your meat is burnt, cut away the burnt pieces. The fourth thing, the little mini tip here, fourth mini tip is marinate your meat in garlic, red wine, lemon juice, or olive oil to significantly reduce some of the harmful elements that form when cooking. And the fifth, if you must cook at a high heat, flip your meat often to prevent it from burning. Again, if you're grilling and you're throwing that steak or that chicken or fish or whatever on the grill, and sometimes it has to be high, I know, make sure to flip your meat often and make sure it doesn't burn. And that's it. It's as easy as that. And now I know a lot of people love the taste of fried or grilled meat, but if you want to enjoy your meat and receive the full benefits without any of the potentially harmful consequences, then use these tips to do exactly that. And when you look past the scare tactics and headlines, you'll realize that there's no actual strong evidence linking red meat to disease in humans. Again, there are only observational studies which often don't distinguish between red meat and processed meat. They just kind of bulk them all together and then label it as red meat is bad for you. They also depend on questionnaires and simply can't account for the minor details, like a person's health consciousness. Remember we talked about that. And while observational studies provide hints and, they are kind of useful for generating theories, at the end of the day, they really can't be tested, So as long as you choose unprocessed, preferably grass-fed red meat, and you use the tips that I just gave you, there's probably nothing to worry about. Properly cooked red meat is ultimately healthy. It's highly nutritious and loaded with healthy proteins, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals, along with nutrients known to positively affect the function of both your body and your brain. So that's it, you guys. That's my show for today. I hope you found some valuable information here. And if nothing else, I hope I've entertained you for a few minutes and was able to bring you a little manly sunshine to your day. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to listen to me. It's very much appreciated. On next week's episode, we'll be going over jump roping versus running. Which one will give you a better workout? So if you're like most, you definitely don't want to miss out on that. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with me, then get on over to podcast.dadsplanation.com/VIP to get on the VIP Insiders community, where I share even more raw behind the scenes stories, tips, and hacks that'll keep you feeling younger and younger each and every day. That's podcast.dadsplanation.com/VIP. Again, that's podcast.dadsplanation.com/VIP. Be in the know, starting right now. Also, don't forget to rate me on Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, or wherever you're listening to this podcast episode right now. And leave me a nice, fat, juicy 5-star review and some absolutely beautiful words of why you love the show so much. It really helps me get the word out there, and it's honestly the one place where your vote truly matters. Until the next chat, take care now. Bye.